I'm Brendan, the Technology Concierge. It's always been a dream of mine to be able to interview industry leaders, people who have shaped our industry, and today that dream has come true. And more importantly, I can do it face to face. I first met this person 33 years ago, and I've admired and followed his career ever since. Today, I have the honour and privilege of talking with someone who's been described as truly a legend in the industry, a legend in his own lifetime, and a gentleman. Today I'm joined by Patrick Griffiin AOM. Welcome, Patrick.
Good morning. Love to be here.
Let me give you a little bit of background on Patrick. His distinguished 48 years in hospitality spanned 2 continents and 5 hotel groups. His career started in 1963 as a trainee manager at the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne, a very traditional Victorian era 5-star hotel where he found his passion for hospitality. He joined Hilton Hotels in Amsterdam and then returned to the luxury De Vere Hotel Group in the UK, and at the age of 27 he became one of the youngest hotel general managers in Britain. He came over to Australia in 1988 to Melbourne to set up the highly awarded Hotel Como, and this is where I first met Patrick, as I said, 33 years ago, and ouch, that makes me feel old. In 1992 he joined Orient Express to develop and open the company's first venture into Australasia. That was the Observatory Hotel in Sydney, and Patrick moulded the hotel into a truly iconic Australian legend. In 2009, whilst serving as National Accommodation President for the Australian Hotel Association, Patrick was awarded the Order of Australia in the Queen's Birthday Honours List for his contribution or his services to hotels and the tourism industry. Patrick retired from his role as Regional Managing Director of the famed Orient Express Hotels, Trains and Cruises in 2011 after 19 years. During his time with the company, he oversaw both the Observatory Hotel, which now is the Langham Sydney, and until the sale in January 2010, Lillian Fowles Blue Mountain Resort. Patrick is undoubtedly one of the longest serving 5-star general managers in Australia. On top of his OAM, Patrick has been widely recognised for his contributions to the industry. In 2004, he was recognised by Tourism and Transport Forum with the Quintessential Hotelier Award for 40 years of achievement. Again in 2004, he was awarded the Platinum Award by Tourism Training Australia in recognition of outstanding services and support and personal contributions to tourism. In 2009, he was an inaugural inductee into the Industries Hall of Fame. In 2010, he was inducted into the AHA's Johnny Walker Hall of Fame, and most recently in 2021, he received the Ashley Spencer Service to the Industry Award. Patrick is married with 3 sons. These days, Patrick is an author. He's written a book called The Grand Life, or 3 books, and we'll talk about that. He's an after-dinner speaker, and he's a consultant on luxury hotel services. Patrick, it's such a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you.
First met 33 years ago, I think it was 1989, early 1989 at the Como Hotel. And I remember the conversation as if it was yesterday, even though I was only 23. We were talking about luxury hotels. I was a consultant. We were actually working on a feasibility for a potential 6-star hotel, which never went ahead. We couldn't get the return on investment to stack up. And I remember talking about luxury hotels, and at the time, the new kid on the block, which was the service departments. And since then, I mean, that conversation just stuck with me. So it's just an absolute pleasure to be talking to you today. I really love the books The Grand Life, if you'd like to hold that up. So, the story of your life, Confessions of an Old World Hotelier in the Digital Age. I love obviously the years in London, your years in room service when you started in hotels serving the aristocracy, and it made me realise now why there was a major always featured in Fawlty Towers. But what I really, really loved were obviously your years in Australia at the Como, where I first met you, and then at the Observatory Hotel. And it was, whilst preparing for this interview, that I thought the Como was such an iconic hotel, and I think it was 30 years ahead of its time. It was only 20 years after it opened that the art series created some boutique hotels in the South Yarra area, and then last year Overlow opened their boutique hotel. So that must have been exciting to be there and to create such an iconic hotel.
That was indeed. I mean, it was, how do I put it? It was something very new, and I rather questioned it at the time. The initial idea was to have no signage above the entrance and everything else, and the developers at the time was AGC, and they had modelled it on a number of hotels in New York, and that were really at the time rather special. And I wasn't sure that Australia was quite ready for it. And initially it struggled, but then suddenly it became a hit with all the film stars and people, and it took off. But it was to come to Australia and to open that was a very, very exciting time.
And then on to the observatory, which once again is just it's still making a name for itself. And I think it was the most awarded hotel.
Yes.
Probably still is, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I haven't really kept up with it, but and that was, I think, one of the proudest moments when I look back. Really, it was, working with a team, and it's always the team, to become one of the most awarded, if not the most awarded hotel in Australia. It's a wonderful experience, and really, it's the people.
It is.
That made it so.
So tell me, the book, how did that come about?
Initially, without the sob story, but I was sort of shipped back from Thailand to Perth, and I had cancer, and basically they at the time gave me sort of 8 months, and it was suggested at the time you did your bucket list.
Okay.
And as I sat down to do the bucket list, I started ticking off all these things, done this, been there, done this, and I thought, what is there to do? And and I think it was then that I decided I'd start writing things down.
Yep.
And what started with one book then progressed to 3 books.
Yeah.
And it was such a cathartic experience to be able to do that. I mean, I genuinely believe that it helped me get out through all the chemo and everything else that went on. And that, I think, was a lifesaver to me. And I didn't really do it as a commercial venture. It was something for myself.
Yep.
And it was wonderful. I just realised, God, how lucky I've been. How the hell did I get here? How did I achieve all this? And it was I was just very, very fortunate. I've been, had a very fortunate life in that respect.
That's great. I love the book. It's just fantastic. I've got, I think I got mine obviously from your website. I've got the digital copy on Kindle. Where can we get the book if we wanted to?
The best thing is to go to my website, which is patrickgriffin.info.
Yep.
www, obviously, patrickgriffin.info. And there you'll see, there's quite a bit about the book in there. There are a lot of photographs, and then you can buy it either in digital version or, on hard copy.
Yep.
That's
and it's even available in bookstores, I think.
It's not available in books. Okay. I wish you were.
All right. Oh, we can make that happen, maybe.
Yes.
I noticed that it's on Audible, though. At least the first book.
The first book. Is I must admit, I have leukemia, and that keeps coming out. And I was having, it affected my vocal, and I tried to do this. And a good friend of mine, Steve, he sort of said, "Look, let me have a go at it." And he actually read the book, and then, again, it's technology. It had to go to America, and they had to tweak it, do whatever it is. And, that was book 1, part 1. But I must admit, I didn't have the nerve to say, how about doing part 2 and part 3 again? But no, it is on Audible, part 1.
I've got a couple of questions, Patrick, just so we can, get to know you. With your career, did you choose your profession or did it choose you?
I think in many ways it chose me. I mean, my father was a banker, and we were brought up with this whole concept of never, ever borrow money. And he used to love Shakespeare and say, never a borrower nor a lender be. And when I was at boarding school, there were a lot of lads there with a lot of money. And Dad was fairly frugal, and I borrowed some money from a friend, and I had to pay it back, and I had no way was I going to ask my father for it. So I thought, my God, I'm going to have to get a job. And so I got a holiday job in a seaside hotel as a pot washer.
Yep.
And it clicked. I thought, hey, this is fun. I'm enjoying this. And then, because I was a nice public school boy, they decided to put me in a white jacket and stick me in the restaurant, which I did. And again, loved every minute. It was that interaction with people. I know they say, it's a bit of a cliche. Yes, I love meeting people, but I did, and it worked. And also, I think the whole thing about it was I met people I'd never met before, because I'd been in rather a rarefied atmosphere, I suppose, of a British boarding school most of my life. And, I've got to confess, my mother was a bit of a snob, and friends were vetted almost, And suddenly I met these people who I'd never met, foreigners,
yep.
Italians, Germans, Austrians, Spanish.
These are fellow workmates.
Fellow workmates.
Yep.
And I thought, they were wonderful people. And it was great fun. And from there, I decided, yes, that's possibly a business I could go in, particularly when I rather failed miserably academically at school. It didn't go down well at school at all, because hospitality was not seen as a profession. And my final school report was always, I always remember this thing, a smooth and plausible boy this. I'm sure he'll do well in his chosen trade. And it was the word trade that sparked my father. I mean,
right.
We haven't spent a fortune on our education, get to trade. But, I did. And I think, rather like the Middle Ages, I think the idiot son went into the church or the army. I think in the 60s, we all headed into the hotel business.
Yep.
But the dropout rate was enormous. We were paid peanuts, worked all hours. And, but I just loved it. I didn't care, I'd sort of make half a pint of mild last all night, sitting in a bar or whatever. It was fun.
Yep.
That was the best thing about it.
That's fantastic. Can you tell us a funny, embarrassing, or even memorable story from that early part of your career? I'm sure there's lots in the book.
Indeed. There were many situations, I think, where you sort of you learn from them. But I do remember one where, again, the trainees were given the job of setting up banquets in the afternoon because they didn't have to pay us, and the waiters came back, and we also worked tonight. But in those days, you didn't have these wonderful new set-up tables and everything else. We just had trestle tables, and you flick down the trestles at either end stood, and we then clothed it. And this was sort of a very sort of pompous, evening. It was a Masonic evening, actually, very, ladies' night, and we had top tables, sprigs there, and we laid it all up with all the cutlery and then all the glasses, and there were several wines and flowers, and then we had the Masonic silverware of these different epaulettes and things, all over the place. It looked magnificent. And with these formal events, there's the Toastmaster, and he used to go around the table and, bang on the table, and for, we'll now raise our glasses to whatever. And I was just standing there alongside this fellow trainee, and he banged the table very heavily, and this fellow stood up and he knocked the table. And as he knocked the table, he just fell over. And there was an almighty crash, and all the glass and everything else. And everybody came running around the Metrodine and everything, lifted up the table. And one thing we suddenly noticed was, as he put the trestle out, he slot a little bolt in.
Right.
We had not seen this bolt, and we looked at each other. Not one single table had a bolt locked in it. They were all just balanced out like this. And I think that became the longest night of my life. I nearly turned grey, and every time they banged a gavel, I had this image of a domino situation of all the tables going down. And it was horrendous. But there were, many other things. I put it, people died in the Grand and Eastbourne part of it because they were elderly people.
Yep.
And many of them, there were certain humorous aspects to it. I know it's a bit of a black comedy, but, there were situations, and there wasn't a big emotional attachment. They were elderly people I didn't know.
Yep.
You'd go in and they were dead.
To serve them breakfast, and
everything that happens in the hotel there. I mean, one watches, you mentioned Basil Fawlty
Yeah.
and Fawlty Towers. I could, recount a tale of every episode of Basil Fawlty's where the true thing actually happened. There's nothing, it wasn't made up. Those stories were, could be translated back to the hotel.
I think you mentioned in the book that Polly, who plays Polly as his wife, used to frequent the hotel, and you feel
she used to come. I mean, at the time we didn't appreciate anything about it, and this was what I was told afterwards. I hope it's not a thing of legend, but she was appearing at Devonshire Theatre, which was just along the road from the Grand, and she used to come into the saloon bar, and and it was the barman who sort of said, "Oh yes, we used to chat about things," and I rather like to think that some of those episodes that came out, because she wrote it along with John Cleese.
Yep.
That came out of events that happened at the Grand. True or not, I don't know, but it's nice to think it did.
So, Patrick, what do you consider to be the highlight of your career?
I think overall my careers have been one big highlight as far as I'm concerned, but I think one would have to sort of start with 27 becoming a general manager.
Yep.
As you mentioned in your introduction. Then obviously I think after that, the meeting the Queen, my monarch as an Englishman as I was then,
Yep.
and Prince Charles, Princess Diana. I think those were all obviously very special moments. Coming to Australia definitely was life-changing. It was one of those situations where I had no desire really ever to come to Australia. It was too far away. It was a cultural desert. Aussies were just drunken larrikins, and I think worst of all, they beat England at every single sport we thought we were very good at.
Yep.
But as with all things, once you start to know the country and know the people, I mean, within no time at all, I was a fervent Aussie.
Yep.
I couldn't wait to get my Aussie passport, and they say there's nothing worse than a convert, and I was certainly that. I mean, it's an amazing country, and I think there are many Australians who live here, who've been brought up here, who just don't appreciate how very fortunate they are. We have our problems the same as any country, but overall, there's no other country, and I've travelled the world, there's no other country, I would ever wish to live in. And, the thought of going back to England, sorry, no, I would never do that. We're just very, very lucky.
And meeting royalty must have been special, as you said, but also nerve-wracking. I mean, you were responsible for functions at the Royal Agricultural Society, serving the Queen lunch, basically. Big responsibility.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was fun, but yes, it was nerve-wracking, but the actual thing of doing it, actually face-to-face and shaking the hand of the person, sometimes you always think of this, whatever it is, removed, and I think, I'm shaking a hand who's shaken the hand of every, person, leader in the world, sort of thing. No, it's fascinating. And there were times, once I was standing where I shouldn't have been standing, and the door shut behind me, and I couldn't get out, and the Queen came in, the lady in waiting, passed me the Queen's coat that I had to look after, and I thought, and so I took it out the back and a quick look at the label and things, saying, this is the Queen's coat. A few, in the middle of the afternoon, sort of panicked, people coming around saying, have you seen the Queen's coat? And I said, yes, I've got it. I think, well, if I could have kept it and flogged it for a fortune, I just think
your mother would have been very proud.
My mother would have been, no, she would be horrified. But there are other cases with the royals. The Princess Anne came one day and she didn't eat anything, and I sort of quietly whispered, is anything else good? And she looked at me, and if looks good, kill. Yeah. I'd be dead, it was just horrified. And I spoke to the lady in waiting and said, well, yes, of course, the princess is a bit of a stickler, for protocol. And of course, one knows one never speaks to a member of the royal family unless they speak to you first.
Yep.
So I thought, right, that's a telling off. Next day we had the Queen Mother, and we were clearing up afterwards, and I noticed a handbag under the chair, and I suddenly realised that's where she was sitting, and I suddenly thought, this is the Queen's handbag. weighed a ton. I was convinced there was a Guinness bottle in the bottom, but, could hardly close it. And I went into the drawing room, knocked on the door very carefully, no answer. So I went in, door opened, and, I just went across to the sideboard to put it on the sideboard. Only out of the corner of my eye to see this little lady sitting on the sofa with her shoes off, wiggling her toes like this. And I thought, God, it's the Queen Mother. And I remember looking at her, and she looked at me, and I thought, say something. I'm not allowed to speak to you first. And eventually she did. It seemed like an eternity. And she was lovely. She said, can I see that? And I took it over to her. I said, I'm always leaving that damn thing around. She said, and she was lovely. But then very shortly afterwards, the lady in waiting appeared. And she frog marched me out of there. She was horrified that I was just chattering away informally with the Queen Mother. But, there were many occasions that you had that, will always stay in my mind, and wonderful situations.
So I think it's 16 royals, 4 presidents, more than 60 actors, 36 rock stars, 40 famous sportsmen and women, and over a dozen politicians stayed with you in your hotels. Is there one person that stands out in your memory as for good or bad?
No, the first one obviously being Charlie Chaplin, the first person I met. That will always stay with me, because that was a defining moment. I thought, my God, if we're meeting people like this, I want to be in this business. But no, I think one of the things you found was that there were people, there were film stars and politicians, people who had an image of being so lovely and nice and warm and friendly, who were absolute so-and-sos, miserable so-and-sos. Others who were meant to be gruff and nasty, who were charming, like this, And, there are too many really to sort of actually mention, although one that always stays on my mind, because she was so lovely, I think was Whoopi Goldberg. And this was at the Como. She came in, and all these film stars often have these pseudonyms, so people don't know who they are.
Yep.
And she came in, and she was Willie Survive was her name, because apparently she was terrified of flying.
Okay.
I thought that was very amusing little name to have. But she used to come down, she would chat with everybody, and then she'd go off into the shopping centre and go to the newsagent there and buy half a dozen scratchies. And if she won $2, you'd think it was 2 million, She'd go, wow, like this. And many people didn't recognise, but those that did and approached her, she was always approachable, always charming.
Very genuine.
And there are many people like that. There were some people you had who, you thought, oh God, who are they? Motley Crue. And I thought, oh God, what's this lot going to be like? But no problem at all. It was the fans that often used to cause the problems. Some of them were uncontrollable. But there was one situation where we had U2 staying, and we had the barricades up, and there were thousands of people. My office used to look out over the square at the Como, and I was getting furious because kids were just dropping, cans and bags of crisps and things on the floor, and I went up to go out, and Paul said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going out to have a word." "You still get lynched, don't go out there." And every time the door opens, they set up a chair thinking it's U2 coming. So I went out, and I went over to a crowd of them. I said, this is disgraceful. Do you realise how you two are into the environment? And I have no idea if they were or not. But he said, this is dropping cat. This is terrible. Look at the mess you're creating. And I said, right, I want 5 of you to stay afterwards and clear up. And, one girl put her hand up, then another. And so 3 girls, then the guys, boyfriends or whatever, thought, oh, better put their hands up. And I said, okay, you volunteered. Come to me afterwards when they've gone, and I'll take you up to their suite, and you can see where they stayed. And I was, wow! And suddenly it's got around, and they were chanting my name. We want, like this. And I came back in, and said, well, what did you say to them? I sort of explain what to do. You didn't. And I said, well, yeah. They're kids. They'll be all right. And he said, do you think you ought to do that? I said, okay, well, I won't do it, but some of the heads and the housekeeper and the concierges, and they took these kids up afterwards. And, when they came down, they literally came in. I felt a bit like Captain Bligh on Mutiny on the Bounty, because there were the staff there saying, I'm sorry, Miss Griffin, but if ever you do that again, I'm going to resign. And I said, why? They weren't that bad. They were animals. They got up in their suite. They were trying to pinch coat hangers. They were going through the waste bins, picking up tissues. One girl even went into the plug hole of the bath to pull out hair. And he said, oh, okay, fine, I won't do it again. But I mean, it was, these are sort of, in the court, a day at the office sort of situations.
You must have received a lot of great advice during your time. What's one piece of advice that will always stick with you?
I think that there was one that certainly shaped my career, and surprisingly, it actually came from my father, because my father was a fairly Victorian man. We didn't have, a very close relationship, although later we did. But I remember I was trying to work out, I'd become general manager of the hotel, and I was trying to think of some sort of, what are we here for? And he said, Paddy, which was as I was known. He said, I think in business, there are three groups of people you've got to make happy, you've got to please. He said, the customer, obviously, otherwise they won't return. The owners or shareholders by producing a profit. And lastly, but probably the foremost, the staff and the people you work with. Because if they're not happy, if you can't keep them enthused, then you've got no chance of achieving the first 2 points. And that really stuck with me. And I thought, it's all about the staff. If they're not on board and they can't create that atmosphere that makes the guests want to return, you're lost. Yeah. And that did shape my whole thought of, how I behaved with staff. Then another small thing was quite simply one manager saying to me, Patrick, when you smile, you must smile with the eyes. And as I say, that's easier said than done, but I think with everybody wearing masks nowadays, I think that everybody's been practicing it. But it is, it's a funny little thing, but it's so true. And finally, I think Jim Sherwood saying to me once, Patrick, hotels have got to have the wow factor, got to have, as he called it, the fizz. And I remember him talking about Lilienfels and having a outdoor swimming pool there. I was trying to explain that we've got an indoor swimming pool. Why do we need an outdoor one? I mean, it's winter here most of the time, it's cold. Patrick, we've got to have the fizz, and the entrance to the hotel was normally the other way, but we weren't allowed to come in too often in this other entrance by the house that objected to it. And we literally bought this house way over the odds so as we could have that sweeping driveway up past the swimming pool and past Darley's up to the entrance of the hotel. They're all those sort of little things. I mean, he was a visionary. And I remember Robin afterwards, a few years later, saying to me, he said, thank God we've got that swimming pool. It really is an amazing marketing tool. And I thought, he was an extraordinary man, Jim Sherwood.
To found Orient Express.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, that in itself was a story as well as the wow factor. I mean, I was talking to students sometimes, and one of them said to me, I said to them, I said, look, take a room no bigger than walk-in wardrobe, put a couple of bunk beds in, hand basin in the corner, there's no shower in the place, the loo is down the corridor. How much do you think you could charge for that? And I mean, shaking of heads, impossible. What is it? It's not even a backpacker's sort of place. And I said, well, try $2,000 per head per night. And they'd look aghast. I said, that's what you get. That's what you pay, or did pay, probably a lot more now. Yeah. On the Orient Express for one night going from London down to Venice. And that's the surprise. Yes, okay, you get your meals included, but
you're paying for the experience.
You're paying for the experience. Yeah. For the fizz, the wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what people are prepared to pay for.
Yeah.
And I think, in today's time, we are sort of faced with, so many brands. I mean, it's just homogeneic, which it's really very much the case of mediocrity.
Yep.
I think, and people want something special, and that's what I think there will be a market for. Whether it'll come back, I don't know, but brands now have become rather bland and same.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we will see a resurgence of that unique hotel, and there are a couple of examples here. We mentioned Ovolo before. There's a uniqueness there, and they're pushing the boundaries in theory now with the completely vegetarian, menus at their restaurants. But they're different. Somebody who's about to start in the industry or looking at the industry, what sort of advice would you give them?
First of all, they've got to have a passion.
Yep.
Whether anything you go into, if you've got a passion, you stand a chance of success.
Yep.
If you don't have a passion, I mean, it always amazes me. There are so many people out there with jobs they go to each day, come home, they hate it, and I always thought, how on earth can people live their life? Because it takes up a great part of your life.
Yes.
How can they do that? And I was very fortunate. I just had a passion. I loved what I did. And, it was fascinating. But, that's first thing, got to have a passion. And secondly, I think probably maintain, certainly within the hotel industry, maintain your individuality.
Yep.
I'm so saddened when I see all these hotels and, they're almost cloning their staff. Their staff are being told what to say, when to say, how to say it. They're not. They don't allow the staff to think for themselves. It's. There was one major company that shall remain nameless, and I was staying in a hotel in Hawaii, and I was there for 5 days. And I arrived, and receptionists greeted me, and I thanked them, and they said, "That is my pleasure, sir." The porter took me up to the room, and "Thank you, that is my pleasure, sir." The girl who turned down the bed, "Thank you, that is my pleasure, sir." It was that word "thank you" sparked off an immediate response. "That is my pleasure, sir." Then the trouble is, it came from every single employee of that hotel.
Yeah.
And over 5 days, you think, this is rubbish. They don't mean "that is my pleasure, sir" at all. And the barman, one day I said to the barman, I said, why do you all say exactly the same thing? As if like little robots. He said, "That's what we're trained to do, sir." He was seemed rather proud of it. He said, "No, we all do that." I said, "Well, what would happen if you just said, thank you, or something more sincere?" "Oh, we'd probably be fired." And I said, "Well, really, is that what would happen?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, okay, thanks." And as he walked away, I said, "That is my pleasure, sir." And he wasn't being facetious, he just so programmed.
Yep, so conditioned that
it
was automatic response.
Yeah.
Yep.
But no sincerity in it at all. You sort of realise, well, yes, a computer could do it.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's part of the success of, obviously, both the Como and the Observatory, that you allowed your staff to be individuals. Polite, correct, appropriate, but they could be themselves.
Yeah. And I think I remember when I first came to Australia, I was told, and one of the reasons I got the job was because I was an Englishman, I think, said, "Oh, you can't train Australians, they're not into service." And I was a bit disappointed at that. And, I came with my training thoughts and everything else. And I remember sitting down with a group of porters and concierge at the Como and saying to them, right now, this is what we want to do. And basically running through the checklist of what I want to make this hotel very personal, make the guests feel welcome. And I remember a voice at the back suddenly perked up and said, "Why, Patrick?" And I thought, first of all, I'd never been called Patrick in my life. It was at school it was Griffin, Hotelier Griffin, then I became Mr. Griffin, suddenly being called Patrick. I was taken back, and I said, "Well, that's the way you do it, but why?" And I thought, and that was really a defining moment for me, because I then sort of said, "Okay," and those days it was flip chart.
Yep.
what do you think we ought to do? And I said, well, call them by their name. So you write up, call them by, these are things that were all on my checklist. But the staff there, and suddenly the engagement was there, rather than those blank faces who were listening, do this. And in England, that's what they do. They'd sit there, listen, and hopefully they'd do it. Here, they actually took ownership of these things. And we kept these flip chart papers up behind the scenes for months after we'd opened them. One day, that particular guy sort of didn't do what, and I said, come here, Jim, I said, didn't you write that up there? Wasn't that yours?
Yeah.
Sorry, won't happen again. And it really did, it changed me. And I mean, to me, Aussies can be the best, staff you could ever have, as long as you allow them to be. Yes, you set guidelines, but you don't dictate to them what to do. It's a case of giving them a little bit of flexibility so they can own the situation, they can put their own mark on it and that comes through to the guests, I do remember we had Sir Evelyn Rothschild, who I'd sort of crossed swords with as such in England, and he was a terrifying man. And he was coming to stay. And I remember saying to Michael, who was the concierge at the time, no, he was a doorman at the time, I think, and saying to him, look, we've got Sir Evelyn coming tomorrow. For God's sake, don't be too familiar with him, Pull your forelock, yes sir, no sir, what do you mean? And when he arrived, I went down to meet him. There was Michael. Good day, Sir Evelyn. How you doing? Something. He wasn't quite as coarse, rough about it, but it was also within a few days. Sir Evelyn was down, stand at his desk, with his jacket off, in his braces. I mean, if he had got detached collar, so he couldn't undo it, chattering away with Michael like I've never seen.
Yeah.
Australians have got a way with them that they can, they can just chat. And the people, Prince Charles, when he was out, he was so relaxed. I mean, I met him in England, and all the formality and everything else. In Australia, no, he was a different guy.
Interesting.
Australians are and can be brilliant employees and rarely can deliver on service if allowed to.
Yep. Talking about technology, obviously you've seen a lot of change during your time. Is that for the better, you think? Or, where does technology fit into a hotel in your view?
I think it's there to assist.
Yep.
And I'm a great believer in technology. I'm not a Luddite as such who thinks, no, we shouldn't have it. It's done a vast amount for it. But again, it's been an evolution. From man inventing fire to the wheel to printing press, and it's each development seems to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yep.
And I think the 21st century has really sort of seen an extraordinary, it's like a snowball. It is now, we're at warp factor 5, Mrs. Zulu, in terms of development. It really is. My father, sort of when he grew up with valves, and used to love building radios and things. And during the war, he worked on radar. I grew up with the transistor. And I remember a kid coming to school with a radio the size of a book, and we all sat around in amazement at this thing. My kids have grown up with, basically the chip.
Yep.
When I entered hotels, within a short time of starting there, we had a telex machine, which is a big old clunky thing like that. But it still amazes us because, when the first booking came through from a guy in New York, he was typing and we were seeing it come up. And within 5 minutes, we sent him an answer. My boss looked on in amazement, so he was shaking his head. Couldn't comprehend this, much as I shake my head when I see the technology of today.
Yep.
But, then we had the photocopier machine. All things which we take for granted now, but these were new. And, this replaced the old Gestetner Roneo machine that used to type out on this skin and get ink all over yourself and print out the menus. Microwave. I remember a microwave being sort of demonstrated, and we were all terrified of this thing. We were going to get radiated. And the chef shaking his head as this is a devil's spawn. This is, never catch on. Yet, there's not a household in the civilized world that hasn't got a microwave now.
Yeah, so.
And it's progressed. I mean, I think when I was at school, I worked on slide rule and logarithms. The pocket calculator wasn't even invented until 72. I think by Hewlett Packard. These are, 72 to me doesn't seem that long ago. But,
That's true.
it is something which we've progressed. Now things come out. Only on TV yesterday there was sort of talk about the latest Apple gadgets. They are appearing so fast now. You can buy something today, in 6 months' time it's out of date.
Yep.
Even I've got a drawer full of old telephones, mobiles.
Yep.
Things that we could never have thought. And the only people who had mobiles was, in Star Trek with, beam me up, Scotty, and we all thought that was pure science fiction.
And they're just so powerful these days,
Yeah.
what we can do on them.
Yeah.
And it, to be honest, I think when I look at technology changes in the hospitality industry, the mobile phone has had a dramatic impact because the guests can now do a lot for them. Can do a lot themselves on their own phone.
Yeah.
And from a staff communication point of view as well, there are now, housekeeping requests can be received on a phone rather than, in my day it was a post-it note, walkie-talkie to reception or call somebody to have towels. Now the guest on their phone can actually put in a request for additional towels and it will come up on somebody in housekeeping's phone and they can deliver it. And if they don't deliver it, then there's an alert, it doesn't fall through the cracks. And then also what we see now is at the end of the month, the general manager can say, well, hang on a second, we've got a service problem here. We seem to be delivering toilet rolls or something up to rooms all the time. What if we were to do, put an extra hand towel in the room, do something like that? We wouldn't have this issue to start with.
I think it's great. The fear I have with the level of technology and the reliance on technology is that if something goes wrong, all you need is to have a power out. I look at with the floods that have been happening now.
Yeah.
I remember once, a very rare occasion, we lost power at the observatory. And all the waiting staff were thinking, they don't work. Well, how do we take orders? What do we do? And when we sort of said, well, there's a pad. Use a pad. You should write down the order. Right? They were panicked.
That is
true. And that is an issue, I think, that can happen, but, hopefully not too often. But it does worry me a little bit. That
I think generally, though, everybody's dependent on technology. If you left home now and you forgot to take your mobile phone, you would turn around and come back for it. Because heaven forbid, that you could go out to the shops for 2 hours and not have a mobile phone.
Yeah.
So it's not just in hotels.
Yeah.
And luckily enough, I think power is pretty good. Internet is generally pretty good. I totally agree with you. I think the purpose of technology within a hotel is to act as an enabler for staff, to allow staff to deliver a better personalised experience.
Yes.
And I think we're going to see, my hope is that we will start to see, I suppose the cycle come back. Properties like the Observatory, properties like the Como, and we're starting to see it with Ovolo, those sorts of properties where it's an experience. It's not an homogenised stay with staff that have rote sentences they're being told. So hopefully we're going to see that. And I think if we can use technology properly to allow the staff to have conversations like you used to encourage your staff to do at the Observatory and the Como.
I think so. And I come down very heavily and hard on accountants.
Yep.
Because I think, the industry in recent years has been run by accountants rather than those visionary hoteliers that I grew up with. And as such, they really only see things in black and white. It's a case of it makes a profit or it doesn't make a profit. It doesn't make a profit, and, sometimes things that don't make a profit inadvertently actually do make a profit because it's the thing that brings the customer back.
Yep.
And they're the people who they're the people who are paying our wages. And I think, if only GMs could get out from behind their computers. They've got so much information that, they don't know what to do with. Don't just look at it and think, oh, yes, wonderful stuff. Get out from behind there and actually talk to the guests occasionally, meet with the guests. And I used to have a little thing that I'd do every evening before I went home at night. I'd sort of phone up a number of guests in their rooms, and it'd be astounding the reaction I got when I said, hello, this is Patrick Griffiin, I'm the general manager, blah, blah, blah. Like that, oh, right, oh, thank you, no, everything's wonderful. And they commented on that. They'd sort of, write in, and some of them write to my boss and say this, which was great. And these are the sort of things that can be done. And even if you don't speak to them, you can leave a voice message for them. And it's all it's the detail of how you care for that guest. And it's not that difficult at times. But we use our computers, I think, often as an excuse.
Yep.
You're too busy. They do. It is something we hide behind. I think managers often hide behind.
Yeah, or we're too concerned about the process, and I consider, that I hate to say it, but the traditional check-in, a lot of it was really, about the paperwork, rather than the experience with the guest. And if we can use technology to allow the guest to do all the paperwork before they arrive, and when they arrive, just have a personal, personally engage with a guest. And if they want an extended chat, then staff should have time to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's as you said, it's those experiences that make people return to a property. Obviously, it's got to be a nice property, but it's the fact that they feel welcome. I think you told me that, one of the things you learnt early on is that everybody has an ego.
Yes.
And if you can stroke that ego, then you'll win them over.
Yes, it's not a bad thing to have an ego. It's just something that we all have.
Of course.
Some big, some medium, some little. But if you can stroke that, if you can actually make them feel that little bit special, they're yours forever. It's funny that my son worked at the observatory, then stayed on with Langham, and I was astounded. He used to come home and say, "Oh, we had Mr. So-and-so. He was asking after you." The other day, and this is years after I've left.
Yep.
And they sort of almost goes, well, where is he? Where's the general manager? Come out, and it was lovely. My ego, the power of good, hearing these sort of little stories, but it is something that guests long for it. Last week there was HM magazine had done a survey about will people return to restaurants?
Yes.
And in this survey, one of the responses was, yes, if I'm recognised as return guests. And 86% said they would go if they were recognised. It speaks for itself. This is the survey.
And that's where technology can help staff recognise the guest.
Yes.
So it has its place.
Yes.
It has its place.
What upsets me often is that, moving around, I've had to buy things and all the rest of it, and the number of these little questions say, your opinion counts. Please tell us how we performed or how we rated. And some of them are excellent, I'll say excellent, and others have been absolutely bloody appalling, and I thought, this is a joke, they don't practice what they preach at all. And I've written back. I can truthfully say, from some of the complimentary responses I've given, I've had the odd letter back or odd response. From the complaints, I've never had one.
Isn't that interesting?
And I thought, why are they gathering all this? It just goes to prove that my opinion really doesn't matter. They really don't give a damn about my opinion. And you'd think with all the technology, it'd almost be possible to sort of what we used to call the mouse letter. They could almost put it together, a letter that sounds personal and saying something back.
Of course.
But it just stops. And again, as we were talking about earlier, I think it comes down to, right, they've got all this information, it goes before the accountant or whoever, and he said, tick, 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 box, we're achieving that, achieving that. And that's all it's there for.
As long as we don't go over a certain threshold of complaints, our net promoter score is fine.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's it.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, at the moment, pretty much as a result of the pandemic, we have a heightened staff shortage. I mean, we've always had a bit of an issue in hotels. Do you think that's a short-term problem, or do you see that as a long-term problem? And what do you think we can do about it to attract people to our industry, I think?
Yeah, I think it'll ease as time goes on, but it all depends on what we do to attract the staff.
Yep.
You know, I think the staff need some sort of satisfaction in the job they're doing. You know, apart from the monetary side of it. I mean, I have to say at the observatory, I don't like to admit it, but I can't say that we paid top dollar.
No.
You know, for the staff. But our staff turnover was minimal, and we were never short of staff. We always had applicants. Because it's, you know, they felt they were part of something and they could contribute to something. And as you know, we've talked before about, you know, nowadays they don't seem to have a voice in the job that they do. They are just, you know, right, this is how we do it, this is what we do, this is what we say, this is how we say it. And that is it. They're not allowed to think, they're not allowed to add their own sort of feeling onto this. You know, I used to try and encourage stuff. I don't want you saying, you know, thank you for calling so-and-so, my name's Patrick, how may I direct your call? That's not how people really answer phones.
True.
Well, they do when they're trained to.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't want them saying, you know, good day, mate, what do you want? But, you know, people have got common sense. Let's give them credit for it. And, you know, pick the right people. And that's always the thing,
True.
pick the right people.
Yep.
And they will do you proud. You know, I mean, as I said, everything that I've achieved was on the back of the staff, that they achieved it for me.
Yep.
They were the people who did it. And, you know, that was done by giving them their head in many ways to be able to feel part of it and come up with suggestions. And I mean, stupid things. I mean, I used to go down and have lunch regularly in the staff canteen with the staff, which seemed rather a rare thing for amongst managers, you know, they're too, whatever. But, you know, I've talked to the room attendants. These are the people who are on the coalface. And and eventually they got to know me, and they, you know, initially it was that, God, the boss is here. But then they saw you as an ordinary guy, and I think we weren't the best of mates. We didn't go out drinking together, but they talked to me. And Australians particularly.
Yep.
Sometimes you couldn't stop them. But, you know, it was great. And it was like a family.
It's so important. Even today, I hate to tell the story, but I was at a hotel in Sydney, a chain hotel, but a significant, you know, like a 5-star within the chain. I was with the assistant chief engineer, and we were going up to look at a room. And two room attendants hopped into the lift with us. And he actually introduced me to them as the new general manager. And I was like, when they got out, I said, what was that all about? And he said, new general manager's been here for 6 months. He has not been to housekeeping. He's not been anywhere. And none of the staff know who the general manager is. And he said, I was just trying to make a point that you could be the general manager. And I thought that was really, that was wrong, you know.
Yeah.
And as you said, the way you operate is completely different. People have a desire to feel that they belong. Everybody wants to belong somewhere. And it comes back to that ego thing as well.
Yeah.
Make people feel welcome, staff, guests, and you'll succeed.
I mean, you've got to be careful here. I don't want to say who or what, but, you know, I remember one person who had been working at the hotel for a long time. Well, in fact, all the time I was there. And when I left, he happened to be saying to someone, one of the managers that followed, I won't say who, but, you know, oh, I love working here. It's just like, it's being like we're part of a family. And the response he got was, we're not part of a family, we're a business, like that. And I thought, what did that achieve? You know, it rather deflated this guy, you know. Why did he need to say that? You know, even, yes, true, it is a business. But here was someone who was rather proud of the fact he was working there because he was part of a family. And he was like that. And I could never understand that sort of attitude.
And I think it comes back to that advice that your father gave you. You look after the staff, staff look after the guests, happy guests, profitability, happy shareholders, you know.
And this is back in the 60s, sort of, or early 70s, you know, and Dad was a banker, you know. I mean, bankers aren't known for their creativity or imagination, certainly in those days, you know. And I mean, it really did stay with me. It did form so much of how I approach business.
So something that's formulated in my mind as we're talking is that if you treat people like people, whether they're staff, whether they're guests, whether they're suppliers, then you'll be successful. You know, that's really part of the secret, you know, to running a great hotel. Just treat people genuinely as people.
You've got to have sincerity in what you do, because you know, that if you put on a face of whatever it is, it doesn't last long.
Yep.
People soon see through it.
Yep.
You know, I mean, there are certain people who accept it as, oh yes, but no, I think most people eventually see through it, and it's, you know, it just won't work. But you know, which is sad, you know, that people, you know, managers don't think more like that. And there are those who do, but many are almost programmed out of thinking like that, saying, no, we've got this corporate thing we've got to do.
Standard operating procedures.
That's the word.
That's it.
It's like everything's rather words have even changed.
SOPs, you know, actually, we call them now.
Yeah. Well, it's something which in the past few years has suddenly come into conversation now. I mean, people don't contact anybody anymore. They reach out. Okay. Where did this come from, for goodness sake? Suddenly everybody is reaching out. You know, I write something and I say, thank you for reaching out to us. You know, and I think, did we really say that? But that's...
I hate to say, I think it's a lot of the American TV that we get fed, because I know my teenage daughter watches a lot of American TV, and, you know, the word candy comes into conversations, and it's like, we don't call it candy.
I mean, as I said, my son's part, I've heard him say reaching out. The other thing, of course, people say is sort of so, which is better than me saying as I do so often in conversation. Now they say, you know, ask a question, so, you know, but that's how it is. As, you know, they can't live in the dark ages like I did.
True. It is a much smaller world now.
Yes.
As we're seeing, obviously, with Russia.
Well, that was interesting, because this morning they were interviewing some Russians, and one Russian said, we can do without McDonald's. You know, let's get back to the Soviet Union, how it used to be, sort of thing, you know. And I think there are a lot of people who actually do think sometimes McDonald's isn't the greatest thing. I mean, we've grown to live with it, and globalization isn't necessarily the greatest thing.
True.
But it is what it is. You can't stand in the way of progress. No,
but as we've talked about, I think some things, good things, come back around.
Yes.
And, you know, we talked about McDonald's, and I think I've told you my grandfather was a chef, and my uncle took him to McDonald's. I think it was the first one that opened here in Sydney. And he thought, he was appalled that there were no tablecloths, no cutlery. You know, he's like, this is never going to take off.
Yeah.
And it did for many years, but, you know, as we've said, McDonald's themselves have had to adapt. You know, the McCaff is a good example. The salads have introduced, you know, things change. And that personalisation, you know, making hamburgers from scratch rather than having them, you know, you get what you get and you don't get upset. Now it is, we'll customise and bring it to your table. So, you know, I'm hoping that we will see that come back in hotels as well.
I think, I mean, I look back and I think the things I said would never get, you know, I always remember an American coming up to the desk, which is, let's say early 60s, and saying, you know, do you take credit cards? And I looked at him and said, I'm sorry, what are they? He said, oh, you don't know? I said, no, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't. What are they? He said, diners, you know, we have this credit card. I said, oh. I said, how does it work? I said, well, I give you the credit card, and diners pay you for that. I said, really? I said, how long does it take to get our money then from this? Oh, a month or so. And, and this conversation, fascinating. I went down to the back and talked to a few of the big guys and I said, there's a guy there we've got this plastic card now and, but we don't get the money straight away. We've got to wait for a month or so. And we all shook our heads with, this will never catch on.
And now we're pretty much in a cashless society.
And now, yes. And now, in actual fact, they're out of date, almost, credit cards. I mean, I've got this wonderful watch, that I just click and go.
Yep.
It's amazing just how things go and the things we think never catch on. But McDonald's did.
It did.
The credit card did. So many other things did.
But the credit card, I suppose, is now also being, the credit card companies exist, but the physical cards themselves, as you said, are being digitized.
Yeah.
And everybody's tapping with their phone or with their watch. So
yes, and that's what this whole
changing.
apps thing scares me to death. Never know quite how it all works, but I wait for my son to come around to explain.
Patrick, if you could go back in time, what time would you go back to?
Overall, the immediate thing to say, I think, is 1963. Because I would go back and I'd love to start my career all over again.
Yep.
Quite genuinely, that's something I'd love to do. But being more specific, I'd probably say 1967, because 1967 was the year that I finished my training at the Grand and then went to do my stage with Hilton, which in itself as well. Hilton, there were only 5 of them in Europe then, and this was going to be rather special. But above all, that period in 1967 was sort of coined the name by the press as the Summer of Love.
Yep.
And Amsterdam, of course, was full of the hippies, the flower power people. It was an extraordinary time to be around. I remember a cafe there that opened called Mellow Yellow.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the first cafe to open, I think, where you could get hash cookies. I never ate one or swallowed it. But, it was just a fascinating place, an era time, really, to go to. And then at the end of that year, I returned to England and took up my first assistant manager's job. And I was still only 21.
Mm.
And it was an extraordinary year, I think, 1967. It was something very special that could never be repeated, but I'd love to go back.
From a fashion point of view, I think I know the answer, having read the book. But if something could come back in fashion, would it be bell bottoms?
Well, actually, for me, yes, because I've got a size 13 feet, and when drain pipes were the fashion, I hated wearing them because my feet stuck out like a penguin. Right. But no, that aside, one thing that I would love to come back in would be the tie. Managers wearing ties. I cannot comprehend how, certainly in city hotels, and certainly in 5-star hotels, why you can have all the staff all kitted out, bow ties or ties, or looking all smart in some uniform or other, and the general manager comes down with not only his top button of his shirt undone, but his second button as well. Why do you have a general manager who comes out looking as if he's about to get out on the golf course, and yet he's surrounded by all these immaculately turned out staff? I just don't get it. Sadly, I was told, when I made the comment about, I think some of the thinking might be to have the manager with his open shirt at the observatory, and the person said, about time we got rid of the old fuddy-duddy and got with the times. But I thought, right, okay, I'm retiring at the right time. It's sad. I just think it's part of a uniform. It's just the way one presents oneself.
And it's part of the experience, I think, as well.
Yeah.
I can understand that they're saying, replicate your customer, be more casual, be more like your customer. But at the same time, why not be different and give the customer the experience? Because if they wanted the same thing, they could stay at home.
But do you wish to replicate your customer in all things? As you say, the difference. I remember once a teacher I knew, used to go to teach in his jeans and t-shirt and stuff like this. And I said, what, don't you dress up? You know, I mean, when I was at school, the masters came in capes, you know, in a cape and things, and a gown. And, you know, he said, no. He said, we've got to relate to the kids.
Yep.
And I thought, again, where do kids get the examples from? You know, who sets the bar? Who sets the standard? And, you know, to me, it's the same in a hotel. You know, the general manager really, you know, should set the standard.
Yep.
You know, and that's how it goes. Why should he be so different? I mean, if one of his staff wandered in the restaurant, unless that was the design, but unless, you know, walk in a restaurant where they're meant to be wearing nice waistcoats and bow ties or something, he came in his jeans and t-shirts, I mean, the manager would be horrified. But that's me.
If you could choose to do anything for a day, what would you do?
I've been very fortunate. I've done so many things, and as I'm not sure I mentioned earlier, but when I had to do a bucket list once, I did my list, and very little I hadn't done. I was, you know, by courtesy of the hotel or by a guest who sort of stayed in the hotel. But one thing I would dearly love to do is fly in a Spitfire. That has always been that's the one thing that remains on my bucket list, really. But in New Zealand, you can actually do.
Okay.
But it's something, yeah.
And you can't do it here in Australia? We don't have any?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no.
Because there are only very few sort of dual-seated sort of Spitfires, which came from Canada, the Canadian. But no, love to do that. I got very close to it when I was back in England. We agreed to sponsor some of the VIPs at the hotel, and in return for this air show. And in return, they said, you know, I talked about it. They said, yeah, we'll get you up in a Spitfire. And I thought, wow, this is it. I'm going to do it. Sadly, the fellow who was organising it sort of ran off with the money.
Oh no!
and the whole thing the air show fell through. You know, and I thought, oh well. But it'd be a fun thing to do.
One final question, Patrick. Who would you like to play you in a movie about your life? Who would the actor be?
A very unlikely scenario, but yes, wouldn't it be fun? I think, you know, there are a few people I think are sort of rather special. Is it Colin Firth?
Yep.
Colin Firth, I always think, is a wonderful guy. Rupert Everett is another character. Jeremy Irons, I thought, yes, he'd be very good. He'd be a very good hotelier. But the trouble is, he's a bit old now. I say that with caution because he's actually 2 years younger than I am. But as a young person, Tom Holland, I think, is. But it's not that I really know many of the younger actors now. But yeah, I think I think the industry, you know, it's been a long time since Basil Fawlty. True. And I think, you know, this sort of story could actually, you know, make a good film. My brother's a film producer, and he said, if only I was younger, he would, you know, love to have a crack at it, but it won't happen, but it's a lovely thought.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? Patrick, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much. Before we go, could you tell us again where we can get a copy of your wonderful book?
Simply go online, wonderful technology, and go to www.patrickgriffin.info, patrickgriffin.info, and there you'll have all the page have information, lots of photographs, and just how to buy it, either digitally or the traditional book.
Yep.
And you can even get a talking book,
audible version.
Yep. Audible. You know, just sort of part one anyway, but we haven't got around to doing part 2 and 3. But no, it's on there and easily obtained.
Yep. No, I love the book, and I'd encourage anybody within the hospitality industry to get a copy and read through it. Just the history itself. It's just amazing to see how the industry has changed dramatically, and that's what I've enjoyed chatting to you about today. So thank you, Patrick.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.